Good day, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Toadally the Toad back with another video. And as you can see, today I'm playing Mass Effect Andromeda. Because recently me and my friend, we tried out Mass Effect 3 multiplayer, and we thought, hey, didn't Andromeda have a multiplayer too? Yeah, it did, didn't it? And since neither one of us could remember anything about it, we decided to try it out. Let's get into it, shall we? And I'm sorry if my voice sounds a little rough today. I'm currently having a cold and, man, it sort of strains my voice a little bit, so I'm sorry. But still, let's do this thing. So this time I'm dividing the video into different parts like I did in the Generation Zero video. And let's start off with my overall thoughts of the game, or the multiplayer version of the game. So, first thing to note is that there are 7 waves, and during 2 of those waves there are missions, much like in Mass Effect 3. And I will get more into that later on in the video. But my first thought, after I got over the, as always, initial shock of the controls.
Jag kommer inte ihåg de här gamla, det var så länge som jag såg dem.
Så långt jag glömde att man kan hoppa det här spelet.
Is that they are more smooth and more easy compared to Mass Effect 3. Still not very smooth if I compare it to other FPS games though.
Nu gömmer jag mig! Nu gömmer jag mig!
The game also looks fairly good, but this is only sort of the multiplayer version, because I remember the faces and the models looking really wonky in the actual game, but in the multiplayer I'm giving it leeway, because that's not really the main focus of the multiplayer, so. But still, it looks pretty decent, I think. All of the enemies that you encounter, they sort of behave in the same way, and I will get more into enemies later on, so again I will get back to that. But the first thing that we noticed was that it's much more difficult than Mass Effect 3 multiplayer, and again I will get into that in just a second. Now let's talk a bit about the characters you can play. There are quite a few different characters, and to be fair, I remember none of them except for the one I'm playing right now, because it's the one I played most. They are sort of boring and they don't really stick out. And I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's because I played this game so much less than Mass Effect 3, but the characters that you can choose from, they're kind of meh overall. They're also less efficient or effective if you compare them to Mass Effect 3. Loads of them have some sort of bombs or grenades or mines that you need to replenish at these sort of ammo box stations. And that means that they get very little efficiency, because you have to get back so often to replenish stuff that it sort of takes too much time for it to actually be a worthwhile method. So that's one of the reasons I stuck to the engineer here, because she did not have anything like that, which made her much easier to handle.
I'm coming!
So, because many of these characters are less efficient and require constant replenishing, and to my knowledge they have the same amount of health and shields-ish, there is a feeling that you're being shoehorned into playing a specific type of character again. And that is a long-range type of character that has to move around constantly, because all of the enemies will constantly move towards you. I will get into that later on, but they will. And since no one has more health or shields in any significant way, there is no real tank, you sort of have to move around, and that means that you kind of need to be long-ranged or you're fudged. At least in my opinion. Maybe I'm just playing the different characters wrong, but I found it very difficult, to be honest with you. Just like in Mass Effect 3, you also level up your characters, and you start in level 1 up to level 20. However, Since this game is so much more difficult, which again I will get into later, starting with a level 1 character, especially if you're only 2 players, is really tricky, and you end up dying over and over again. So for me, that's also one of the reasons I kept sticking to my level 20 character, to even have a shot at completing the waves, and we were playing on the easiest setting. So I think that's also saying something, that it's not really meant for low level characters, but if you unlock one, you kind of want to play that, but then you kind of can't, and it's frustrating. Some of them also have random, not bugs, but design flaws. Like my turret that I have with my engineer, it keeps firing at walls because it knows the enemies are behind them, but it doesn't realize that there's a wall in between, so it keeps firing at the wall. And I mean, that doesn't destroy the gameplay per se, but it's such a frustrating thing when the enemies don't do that, so clearly it's not a programming thing that couldn't have been solved, you know? So it just ends up feeling a little bit lazy.
Åh, jag love folket! Kommer hit!
Oh lord, what the hell was that?
There's also the issue with animations, especially if you melee, because the animation with a melee, and if you're getting grabbed by an enemy, it's also true if you're being shot and you stumble backwards. The animation is so long that you kind of end up being killed off before the animation has completed. And that to me is a big thing, because it really impacts the way you play the game. And it sort of bothers me. I mean, I get that there should be an animation, but I don't think that's what should get you killed.
Oh no.
Last thing about the characters is that there are rank cards that you can get from the shop. When you shop, you get random loot, and the randomness of the loot did sort of bother me, because I never got what I wanted in the loot of Mass Effect 3, and it's the same here in Mass Effect Andromeda. Since it's random, you don't get to choose. But the character rank cards that you get is better in a way than if you compare it to Mass Effect 3. Because in Mass Effect 3, if you got the same character more than once, you unlocked cosmetics, which is fun, I like that, but it's not much of an incentive to get loot boxes. At least when you got the same character more than once in Andromeda, you get character ranks, which means that you get bonuses for their characters, and those include damage. And that's pretty good. I like that. It's a fine addition.
I'm so sorry.
So, let's move on to enemies. They are super boring. I mean, they're fine enemies, I guess, but they do feel like rip-offs from Mass Effect 3. There's Ket, which is like the Collectors. There are Outlaws, which are like the Raiders. Remnants, which are like the Geth. And to me, that's sort of boring. I mean, in a way I get it, there's not that many different types of enemies you can do in a game like this, but some of them act in such a similar manner that it's so obvious that it's the same enemy but with a different model, and that's when it feels lazy.
Ett hål, jag föll ner i ett hål. Åh, då dör jag.
All the different enemies also act the same. As I mentioned before, they all try to swarm you, so everyone will move towards you, and they will also flank. And in a way, this makes the game more realistic, because I feel like that's what the enemies would do. If you're one and they're like 5,000, of course they will try to get around you and they will all go for you. So in that sense it's great, but it does make the game more difficult, as I will get to again later on. But the main bother that I have with this is that all of them act the same way. The Ket, the Raiders, the Outlaws and the Remnants, they all do this, and that's what makes it boring for me. I mean, I get that the robots would not care for their personal health, maybe, if they're not sentient. I don't remember from the actual game if they are. But the humans would be, so maybe they would act differently. And I think that's something that should be taken into account when you make this type of game. But it's not. So, not much else to say about the enemies. To me, I mean, I guess they're fine, but they do feel a bit meh.
Oh my lord!
Good job.
Yeah, you too!
Let's very quickly go into the maps. There are 9 maps, and they're also very meh. And if you pick random map, random enemy, I'm not sure how random it is, because, I mean, it felt like we always got the same 3 maps, and some of them, even though we played for a few hours, we never got. I don't know if that means something or it's just bad luck, but it's fine, I guess. It's just something that I noticed.
I'm not crazy. Am I crazy? I might be crazy. I am apparently crazy.
Yes, I get it.
Ah,
You're not crazy.
I'm not crazy.
I mean, you're crazy, but not for that reason.
Now let's get into the one thing that I've been harping on constantly throughout this video. The game is more difficult than Mass Effect 3. I'm not necessarily saying this is a bad thing, but it is frustrating in some aspects. Now, let's start off by mentioning again, there are only 7 waves compared to the 11 in Mass Effect 3. This means that the difficulty increases faster between waves. So there is like a greater jump in difficulty between 1 and 2, and so on and so forth. That means that overall it will increase, like the difficult feeling will increase faster, and you won't have time to get used to certain enemies, because like in Wave 3 there's already 4 of those types of enemies. Again, not saying that's a bad thing necessarily, but it's something that I noticed. And again, as I said before, all of the enemies flank, and that's sort of a realistic thing, I guess. But it does mean that no matter where you stand, you will almost always be fired at from different angles. Which means that you will have to constantly run around, try not to get shot at while you run around, stop, take a few pot shots, and then keep moving. Which means that there are certain playstyles that are so much in favor of this type of gameplay, and certain that's not. And I think that's a pretty bad feeling. Not sure if that's just me though, but I was bothered by it.
Han bara
Verkligen. Uff.
There are also quite a few enemies that can shoot over these lower covers. Again, this is pretty realistic that the flying enemies can just fly up a little higher and shoot you. But it sort of adds up to the point I made before, that since you're being constantly flanked and swarmed, and then you can't even get into cover at the one place you thought you could get into cover, that was such a bother for me, because I felt like no matter where I stood, I could never catch a breather, get my shields back up and be safe. However, I do acknowledge that that might not be a flaw, and that just might be how I prefer the game, but it's something worth mentioning.
Sort of pose on. Oh my god.
ja, yeah. Det ser ut som en douche.
Ja, det gör det.
Since the characters feel less efficient, most of them have to pick up not only ammunition but sort of bombs and stuff, and there are no tanks. You do feel shoehorned into playing one specific type of character, and that also makes it more difficult if you want to try to play something else. So not only does the enemies feel more difficult, it's also the fact that for certain characters it just is, at least in my opinion. And again, this might just be me being rubbish at the game, which I am, but it did bother me quite a bit that I could not just headbutt everything as a Krogan, because if I did I just ended up dying instantly.
Yes, of course. That's what I said. Leave this house!
Leave here and never come back, vad jag hörde.
So overall, what do I think of this game? Well, if I compare to Mass Effect 3, I do acknowledge that it is smoother to play, but it just feels like such a poor rip-off that I would still pick Mass Effect 3 over Mass Effect Andromeda any day, you know? Because it does feel so meh. The characters are meh, the enemies are all the same but with different, you know, skins, I guess you could say. And I would not recommend this game to anyone, especially since if I mention the single player game, I don't even want to mention the single player game. So, I did not enjoy it.
What?
Yep.
However, if you enjoyed this video, give us a like, subscribe, all of that jazz, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!
Oh, Jesus.
Där nere.
Oh, this
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
terrible.
Åh, fan! Var jag nere?
Han tog mig fast jag var osynlig.
Nu är jag nere!
Ah! No! You can do it!
Det är level 1. This line I'm done again.
Det ämnar inte ens. Oh!
Det är precis utanför.
Oh!
You're the best.
Thank you.
Oh my god.
Yay!
Jesus!
Den saven där alltså.